Welcome back, everybody, to Softball Speakeasy episode 7. And if you're new here, my name is Raine Wilson. I'm a former Duke softball player turned analyst and broadcaster.
And my name is Kelly Torres, also a former Duke softball player, current pro, and GA for Clemson softball.
And look, this is your go-to podcast for all things softball, bringing you next level access to the 2025 season through the eyes of the Duke squad as an analyst, and of course the eyes of the Clemson team as a GA, as a coach. We'll be covering all the fun storylines throughout college softball. It's light, it's loose, it's fun. It is Softball Speakeasy. Kelly and I are back.
We're back.
It's been a couple weeks. The
Yes.
last couple weeks, we had two different guests, two star-studded guests, Cassidy Curd from Duke and then Maddie Moore at Clemson. And before we kind of dig in, we want to ask the audience, like, did you like that? What did you think? What was your favorite parts of it? Do you want more? Please comment below right now or comment on our Instagram right now how you felt about the last couple weeks of us being separated but bringing on some amazing guests. Kelly, I loved the episode with Maddie Moore. She is so much fun. And it took a lot away from it. I hope you had a fun time because it was fun to listen to.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, the one that you did with Cass, it was so vulnerable. And it's something that I think every softball player needs to listen. So if you guys are listening to this episode and haven't listened to Cass's or Maddie's episode, go ahead and listen to those because they're ones that you can't miss.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I loved how both were very different, but also the messaging from Maddie and from Cassidy was similar in that they both don't take themselves too seriously, but they take the game seriously. They take the craft seriously. So I think that's just such an important distinction, and to just reiterate, like any young athlete out there, to listen to both of those, but especially for young athletes who maybe are going through a tough time, a slump, a rough patch. Cassidy's episode was like so vulnerable and incredible, and just hats off to both of those ladies for joining us. We'll have some more guests hopefully coming up here soon, but because we were separated for the last couple weeks, you and I did not get to talk about the Duke and Clemson series.
No, you
So
did not.
Kelly, before we dig into the numbers of how that series went, actually,
Yeah.
you know what, let's start with that.
Okay.
Friday, Clemson dog walked Duke. I mean, point blank,
Yes.
period. Absolutely dominate. We'll get into that. But
hmm
then game 2 and game 3, Duke was able to flip the script and take the series. So take me through you being in the dugout for Friday
Yeah.
night's beatdown. And then take me to the last game on Sunday. After that game, you're in the huddle. Just take me through all the emotions of that weekend for you.
Yeah. I mean, well, emotions.
Yeah.
It was weird. I'm still struggling to say how I felt because I was so happy, but then like sad and then confused. It was such a mix of emotions. But Friday, Clemson softball came out, and that's the way I know they can play.
Mhm.
Defense was solid, pitching was locked in. And I mean, hitting was just insane. They couldn't catch a break. It was really fun to see that, like, that grittiness, that energy, they just came out, and I know that they have that. So now I have that standard for Clemson softball. But at the same time, when we were hitting and everything was happening, like, seeing the errors Duke were doing and, like, it was it was like I was happy, but then I was sad seeing Cass's face or Amina's, like, demeanor and, like,
Mhm.
Kyrie missing a ball and, like, things I wanna tell Kyrie to help out, and it was just a really I was torn. My heart was torn of, like, I wanna be happy, and I also wanna help Duke, but then Duke beats us, and then I'm sad for Clemson. I was just so
Yeah.
confused.
Yeah, especially the Friday night game when honestly that the wheels like were falling off the cart for Duke, like
Yeah.
defensively, just like uncharacteristic mistakes and just nothing was going their way. And I texted the alumni group chat and was like, I know Kelly wants to just like call time and like walk out
Yes.
there.
I wish I had the ability to call time, go out there and talk to them and like it I know how they play, you
Yeah.
know? That was the same defense I had when I was catching last year. And I just it didn't look like they had that same confidence. And we can get into that later. And I'm sure they're going through ups and downs. And this is a learning piece for them. They lost a lot of seniors and I think they'll get it at the end of the season, but the numbers don't lie. You can tell that they are struggling this year.
Yeah, I think struggling more than years past, and I think when, when softball fans see that, there's like a couple things you can like point to. I have my own theory as to why they're not doing as well in terms of like average, in terms of record and all that stuff. And I'm sure you do too. I would love to kind of hear why you see the dip in Duke softball this year, and then I'll share mine and we can kind of see where our theories lie.
I mean, that class, what they're juniors now. That junior class is very heavy, and there's a lot of film on them now. I mean, freshman, sophomore year, they kind of got away, skidded away, but now there's a lot of film. You know how to pitch to them, and they're just
Mhm.
trying to navigate that. Kyrie behind the plate, although she's a sophomore, been on the team, she's also new this year. And Cass, they're going from underclassmen to veterans, and that's a really hard place to kind of just be and flip it and learn how to navigate it.
Yeah, I think that that's probably for me what I see is like that kind of the combination of all of those things of
Mhm.
that bulk, that class, that junior class now is stepped up into a leadership role. There's the leadership hole that was left last year. I think that's a part of it. Of course, I think also like their the strength of schedule is like significantly more this year than was last year. And when people would say that last year, I was like, okay, like I don't think that's the reason they're winning though. I think if Duke's team last year, your team last year was playing this schedule, I think you all would probably fare better. But I do think if you're not used to that and it's coming off a year like last year where let's be real, there's probably some serious confidence in that team room, right?
Mhm.
Going into the season. We just made it to the Women's College World Series. Like we're one of the best teams in the country. We return all this talent. Like we are them, and we're actually preceded, ranked number one in the ACC, picked to win it, and then all of a sudden now not looking as great as they probably hoped and they probably feel like they should be playing. And so I think to your point, those sophomores are now juniors. Everyone's preparing for all of them, specifically Cass, specifically Amina. Like D as well, like all of them, right? So all these things that you're mentioning too, but I think ultimately, that adversity will only serve them better for
Mhm.
the ultimate goal,
Yeah.
which is the Women's College World Series and a national championship for them. And I think playing those hard teams is only going to benefit them down the road. But speaking of hard teams, difficult weekends, let's jump
Mhm.
back to Clemson. UNC series against Clemson at Clemson. Take me through what you saw from the Tar Heels. Tar Heels took
Yeah.
game two of the series, Clemson taking the series ultimately, but I saw a lot of good stuff from the Tar Heels, and I'm curious what you saw from them as well.
Yeah. I mean, they have a deep pitching staff.
Mhm,
I think I count about 6. I saw even more in the bullpen. So they have a lot of arms, a lot of things doing different. They have Rogers throwing changeups. They have Dark with a little bit more speed. They have up, they have down. When you have a staff very dynamic and you're able to switch them in and out, like we had one game where I think 4 pitchers threw.
mhm,
And just switching it up that often already kind of makes our game plan change, and then we have to navigate that, and it's like, it takes a couple batters to get back into a groove. So I think
mhm.
UNC really utilizes their pitching staff well, and I said earlier, numbers don't lie. I mean, look at their stats. They have 7 hitters hitting above 350 and 3 or 4, I think I have it down. Oh, 3 hitters over 400. My good friend Kat Rodriguez is leading the team with a 447 average. And just we're pretty deep into the season. It's like a month and a half and hitting that well. And we can talk about schedules and
Yeah.
everything, but still against any team hitting that well is pretty impressive. So, I know UNC has kind of had this label of low in the ACC, but they're flipping it around. They're flipping their script because those hitters, they're pretty well put together.
Yeah, I think when you look at the makeup of their team last year and who they are this year, and even the coaching staff coming over from Marshall and Megan Smith
Mhm.
Lyon, it's the offense clearly can compete with anybody. But to your point, like I'm reading through the schedule right now, and they've struggled against any real quad one opponent. They
Yeah.
got beat pretty bad by South Carolina. They got beat pretty bad by Auburn, they got beat by Michigan. So, but to that point, though, that kind of goes back to the question that we've had before is do you
Mhm.
prepare your team in the preseason? Like let's say UNC and Duke, for example. Duke right now 19 and 9. Okay,
Mhm.
19 and 9, which is the most losses at this point in the season in the last couple years for Duke. And
Yeah.
then you look at UNC and they're sitting real pretty at 23 and 6. Right.
Mhm.
So not a massive difference, but I think like you and me as athletes, like you see that and there's a difference there. Do you set your team up knowing the ACC will be tough with preseason games where you're not facing as high caliber opponents, but they're confident? Or do you
Yeah.
do the other side of things and you battle test them early, they lose some games, and maybe the confidence dips? Like, who do you think? I mean, forget the players on UNC and Duke, but
Mhm.
who, and when you look at the two teams and their records and the kind of approach to the season, who do
Yeah.
you think is better positioned to go further in the postseason?
I still think Duke is. I think
Yeah.
even Clemson has had a very difficult schedule.
Yeah.
And it's like those losses and those feelings and emotions stick with you. So
Hmm.
when you experience that and that atmosphere and those sad grief, all of those negative emotions, you don't want to feel it again.
Yeah.
And that propels you when you face these games again. But there is a positive to playing kind of lower teams and boosting up your confidence. And so when you go into these big games, you don't really think of yourself as a loser. And I know
Yeah.
Duke or Clemson, they don't think of themselves as losers,
Right.
but they obviously have had more losses.
Right.
So it's like I think it's per team. Like if we
Yeah.
do look at UNC and we do look at Duke, I think for UNC this approach is perfect for them because they weren't at the World Series. They haven't had great success. So give it to them. So when they do face these bigger opponents, they're much more confident. Versus
Yeah.
Clemson and Duke, I think they are at a stage where they can handle a little bit more adversity and still be able to be confident at the end.
Yeah, and I think too, like the for Duke and Clemson, they've kind of built their brand as one of like a top 25 team. Like although
Mhm.
Clemson not ranked right now, like they've kind of been in and out of the polls, and Duke a top 25 team. But I'm looking at North Carolina's schedule, right? They sit 23 and 6 right now. Let me read to you the rest of their ACC matchups because honestly, they sh- looking at what I'm seeing now, they could very well be a tournament team just because their record is going to be pretty good, and they have an opportunity to get a marquee win against Duke. But they play Louisville in a series next
Mhm.
weekend, then Syracuse, which we'll talk about Syracuse in just a moment because I just
Yeah.
covered Duke and Syracuse's series. There's a lot there. Syracuse not an easy team by any means after seeing them play. And then they have Duke, which that's going to be their ranked victory. If they can't take at least one from Duke, I think it's a little bit more challenging just because they won't
Mhm.
have that ranked victory unless Clemson finishes the year ranked. But I still think that one victory over Clemson is solid. And then they play ECU, then at Georgia, or not at Georgia Tech, but against Georgia Tech. And then they finish with NC State and Notre Dame, which right now are not playing their best softball. So, I mean, it looks pretty good if you're North Carolina, like to have a pretty darn good season in terms of win loss. And so if they can take one from Duke, I think they put themselves in a good position. Now, from where you sit and the what you've seen from North Carolina, do are they an NCAA tournament team in your eyes?
I think they could be. They are scrappy, they're gritty, like, they're fast, and when you put a combination of the fast, gritty, scrappy together, they're a team that I could see maybe a 3-4 seed really upsetting a 1 or a 2 in a regional. Mhm.
Okay. All right, we'll clip that for later. Another team that I think could be in contention to be a regional team for the first time in a few years is Syracuse. So
Mhm.
we've talked about Syracuse so far this year in that the strength of schedule doesn't jump off the paper. Even Coach King, the head coach for Syracuse, acknowledges that. She's like, "Yo, and I know we haven't played anybody," and they played well. And then at Duke, that was kind of the big question. They played Georgia, lost to Georgia a couple times. One of those games was tight, but outside of that, hadn't really been challenged. Then they get swept at Stanford, which was kind of an interesting thing there because they were on the football field. The lights were super bright. The center fielder couldn't see the ball because of the lights,
Mhm.
and I think that there's definitely an element to that. And then coach also acknowledged like they just didn't play well.
Mhm.
But then they go to Duke And game 1, I know you were busy on the field. Game 1 was a 9-inning game
Yeah.
and really one swing away from it being Syracuse's ball game. And then game 2, Duke hit a couple bombs late in the game that really this score kind of doesn't tell the full story. And then game 3, Syracuse wins. And honestly, Syracuse has an arm in the circle in Madison Knight that I think will have they'll be able to compete down the stretch, and you will
Mhm.
certainly see her this weekend. You'll get to know
Yeah.
her very well in your preparation with Clemson playing Syracuse. And so I'm curious, it's Monday now, but have you all started to kind of prepare and scout Syracuse ahead of this weekend? And if so, what do you make of what they're bringing into town?
The players are doing their own film, and the coaches, I'm sure, are watching film,
Mhm.
but our approach is just playing Clemson softball. And
Yeah.
so going into the game, we know it's going to be in their territory. It's going to be
Yeah.
cold. It's going to be on their field. And we are not taking anyone lightly. And I think that's what happened to Duke. I think they came in, they're like, oh, we're playing Syracuse. And as a former Duke softball player, you as well, you
Yeah.
kind of like, oh, we're playing Syracuse. Like we can have a little bit more fun and it can be a little bit more chillax. I've I don't think I've ever lost a game to Syracuse. Don't quote me on that, but I don't think I ever have. And so all those girls are thinking the same thing. And I mean, you really can't sleep on anyone in the ACC this year. Everyone at least has one person that is going to be able to put up a pretty dang good fight. And I mean,
Mhm.
Madison Knight, insane, being able to do that 2 games, like, they saw her multiple times, and
Yeah.
to throw that many pitches, that many innings, and still have her stuff, very impressive. So, I'm excited to see her this weekend and see what Clemson can do.
Yeah, I'm excited and apologies. You all will be at Syracuse and it will be on Friday, low of
Yeah.
35, high of 45,
Uh,
Kelly. So bring a couple jackets. I know it's going to be a blast up there. But no, I think that that's a really fun and interesting point to kind of touch on and maybe have a conversation about is taking teams lightly.
mhm.
Talking to Coach Depking ahead of the series, for folks who don't know, for a broadcast, typically the week of, you have a call with the coaches. You talk about, their team, and you get some content to use for TV, and also add some context to the team. And she had said like the consistency that she tries to bring to the field every day, she had to like really change and say, no, you cannot, you can't look at the jersey and really like internalize who you're going to face that day. Now, let's be real. It's hard to do that. It takes effort to have a faceless opponent, right? When you play Florida State, you're getting up. When you play Clemson, you're getting up. UNC, if you're Duke, and all these like your rivals, of course. And any athlete can empathize with that exact thing. Is you get this extra like oomph. Now, can you do that for the teams that you've had success against? Because, like we've talked about, the game doesn't freaking know. The game doesn't know
Mhm.
Syracuse has never beat Duke or beat Duke once, I think it was, or twice in their entire existence. So, Kelly, how are you with that as a player? Did you
Yeah.
find you kind of mentioned it there with Syracuse, but like just kind of taking you back throughout your whole career, did you find yourself having to like remember and switch on that, hey, it doesn't matter who we played today, I got to show up? And how do you do that?
Yeah, especially in the sport of softball when you
Yeah.
play many, many, many games in it, you kind of get into the routine of things. Like, how can I be intentional every time? And that's so hard to do. It's a lot
Yeah.
of brain power to just be locked in every game, 4 games a week for
Mhm.
what, 4 or 5 months?
Mhm.
It's very difficult, very draining. But it goes back to leaning on your teammates, not everyone's gonna have a down day all at the same time, and if that happens, Lord, that locker room, oh my lord, like, you wanna
Mhm.
pray for them, but when I'm down, I can lean on my teammate who might be really high and kind of feed off that energy, and that's why it's so important when you're at 100% to give your 100% because you don't know what's going on in someone else's mind, and
Totally.
I think that's what really helped me because it did happen where we're playing lesser opponents, and I'm just, "All right," like, I had an exam in my neuroscience class and I'm down because that was hard and I know I didn't probably do the best and now I got to go play
Right.
a game and okay, I'm here and that's just kind of the vibe of the day. And so you fall into it unintentionally. I mean, no one really goes to the field and they're like, I'm not going to be locked in today, but it does
Totally.
happen. And That's why softball is just an energy game of like, let me lean on my teammates and hopefully fake it till you make it some days. And that's what ends up happening.
Yeah, I think to your point, Kel, very difficult to show up every day and show up as if it's a brand new team, brand new opportunity, and treat every moment like it is by itself and it's alone. But again, not to soft plug our, this is not a meditation podcast. We're not calm. I'm Tamara Lev, or you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome.
No, so it's not the calm app, right? But to go back, like that's what meditation is being in the moment, like literally
Hmm.
just feeling the moment. So anyway, that's a good resource for athletes too. But to your point, very, very difficult to do. You get into a routine, you spend a lot of time, and that's routine is how you cope with the long season and the playing softball. But ultimately being in the moment is so important. But for some teams, for some weekends, it's very easy to be in the moment, to feel like you need to prepare. And for Duke this weekend, it's going to be really easy to turn up the energy button because
Yeah.
Florida State comes into town. And it's also alumni weekend. So all the alums going to be in the crowd. I'll be in the booth for Saturday and Sunday. Kelly, what do you make of this matchup? When I say to you and you hear Florida State is coming to Duke to play, what is your reaction to this weekend and what potentially could go down?
The weeks leading up to FSU obviously aren't the weeks that you want to lead up. You know, you kind of want to have that, like we talked about earlier in this podcast, of that confidence when going against bigger opponents. But FSU, you come with your A game always. And there, I feel like, especially this year, no one's really heard of anything FSU's doing, but they always, always fly under the radar. And then bam, postseason FSU, FSU, FSU. And I'm like, geez, man, like it doesn't matter who graduates and who comes in. I think
Hmm.
FSU and Lonnie, they have made an incredible, incredible program there, and they will always be a top competitor no matter who's wearing the jersey for FSU.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Coach Alameda is incredible. And I remember going to a camp there when I was 14. And one thing that she said still sticks with me. And in fact, when we go to interview her for the broadcast, I'm going to ask her this question. So, Coach Alameda, I'm sure you're listening to this. If you are, you get the question twice. Is she said, like, the moment you think you've mastered this game, the game will pass you by. And my question is going to be like, how do you feel like you've evolved? Like, how do you keep your team at this level year after year after year? And in a way, too, that's like to your point about them being like under the radar, or almost
Mhm.
even years that in past where it's like, ooh, they don't look very good, or like they don't look like themselves, or and then all of a sudden they show up. Like when they won the national championship in 2018, that team was not like dominant from game one to the end of the year. They like turned it on, bombs left and right, and aces in the circle. Like, what do you make of Florida State turning it on at the end of the year nearly every single year?
I think it's part of their culture. Like I
Yeah,
think it's deep rooted. Like
belief.
that's it is. It's this belief that I don't know what they're talking about or what they do to work on it, but it's something that you can tell is consistent. And when
Yeah,
something like that is consistent, it's not by accident. And
yeah.
so, yeah, maybe I think last year we had a belief in ourselves that we've never had before, but I think that was special. And I think that was only my senior year where we're like, yeah, we're going to the World Series and no one's going to tell us otherwise. But to have it consistently in your program when there's people leaving left and right, that's super impressive.
And to the point about belief, there is one team that no matter who is on the team or the talent they have, the talent that leaves, like they believe, and I swear that belief alone propels them to heights that you can never imagine, and that is Oklahoma.
Hmm.
Watching them play Arkansas this past weekend, I was like, there were so many moments that Arkansas, like, hit a home run, took the lead, and you're like, "Oh, okay, they're normal people. They're gonna probably lose, right?" And
Yeah.
then they just find ways to win
Hmm.
over and over and over again. And to your point, like, put a bow on it, it's like belief is, like, half the battle. Like, you need the skill, you need the talent, you need all those things in the culture, but belief, man, belief can just take you to incredible places. And so I'm excited to see how the like whole year shakes out. And I saw one tweet that was about how, and I would love your take on this, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. But I saw a tweet, someone said, there's not one elite team in softball right now. What is your reaction to that statement? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And why?
Yes, I agree. It's very parody, parody, parody. You talk about it all the time. I mean, we're an ACC play, so I can talk to that, but Syracuse beating Duke, UNC beating Clemson. There's talent across the board. I'm not sure if it's this new generation coming in and just like having technology and now they're training in a different way that we've ever trained,
Hmm.
but there's talent across the board. And like that quote said, it's a lot of teams. I mean, Florida, we're not talking about Florida or Texas, but
Yeah.
they're stacked. It's not
Yeah.
just Oklahoma. So, like the end of this year is going to be interesting.
Yeah. See, I agree with everything you said. And I would also say that I would say no to that. I would disagree with that statement of eliteness because I think there's a lot of elite teams. Like, I
Mhm.
think that's why you don't see the one unanimous number one every single week and the undefeated, like Oklahoma being undefeated. But like, even though you're still unsure about them being the number one team. So I think to your point, like after I say I disagree, everything you just said I could say, and that would also say that. And I'm excited to see where the game goes. And every single weekend, it's like, who knows? Like for Syracuse, I didn't expect them to take one from Duke, and not only take one, but really be in every single game
Mhm.
to the point where it felt very evenly matched up. And then you look at this weekend coming up with Florida State, you all going to Syracuse, like so much fun going on. And I feel like we're finally back in it. I'm so excited about that and so much fun ahead. But Kelly, anything to share for the listeners ahead of this weekend in Syracuse?
No, just know I'll be wearing about 5 layers. If you end up tuning in and you see me in a bundle, that's what's happening is I have like 5 layers on.
Yes, yes, we'll be watching. And so Duke will play Florida State this weekend. I'll be on the call for Saturday and Sunday. Kelly will be up in the freezing cold in Syracuse. And like we mentioned at the beginning of the show, let us know what you think about the guests and us having each our own guest and breaking up that way. Please like, subscribe, comment, rate us 5 stars. If you could take like 30 seconds and rate us 5 stars, that would mean the absolute world. Please email us at softballspeakeasy@gmail.com if you're interested in sponsoring the show. But without
Soft
further
plug.
ado, soft plug, without further ado, thank you all so much for watching, listening, viewing, and subscribing. We are so excited to be back, Kelly and Raine, and we will see you next week on the show.